Imagine, if you will, stepping onto a movie set where the actors absolutely do not hit their marks.
Right.
And the director, well, he has zero practical control over the actual environment. And the background extras, they aren't people. They are comprised of over 150 completely untrained, highly lethal apex predators.
It's just staggering to even visualize.
It really is. We're talking about fully grown lions, tigers, cougars, and panthers just freely roaming the production space.
Yeah.
And then imagine that the core cast interacting with these predators isn't a group of seasoned stunt professionals. It's a real-life family, and they are attempting to film a scripted comedy.
Exactly.
That was the daily, just staggering reality on the set of the 1981 adventure film titled Roar. It was created by talent agent Noel Marshall and the actress Tippi Hedren. And, well, the result of this entirely unprecedented setup was a human toll that is, frankly, difficult to comprehend. They saw an estimated 70 to over 100 severe injuries sustained by the cast and the crew.
It is, it's the absolute definition of a production completely surrendering its control to the unpredictable forces of nature. When you study the history of cinema, productions are meticulously engineered to minimize risk.
Right. They have to be.
Exactly. There are strict safety protocols, union guidelines, and a very rigid boundary between the simulated danger you see on the screen and the physical reality of the people working behind the camera. Roar just abandoned all of those established frameworks.
Completely threw them out.
Right. So our objective today is to trace the complete chronological biography of this astonishing project. We're going to start from its initial spark of inspiration in 1969, and we will navigate step by step through a grueling, catastrophic 11-year production process. And then we'll follow its enduring legacy all the way up to the present day. We want to explore exactly how a sincere, earnest message of wildlife conservation evolved into what is widely documented and regarded as the most dangerous movie ever made.
And to give you a sense of the sheer scale of what we are going to cover today, I want you to really think about attempting to build a massive, complex infrastructure project. Something like a municipal dam or a commercial skyscraper.
Right, something massive.
Yeah. Now imagine trying to construct that infrastructure using entirely grassroots methods, funded by your own personal savings, straight out of your family's backyard, while actively being surrounded by wild animals.
The logistical challenges are immense.
They are. But to truly understand how this specific situation materialized, we really have to look at the exact moment the idea was born, which, interestingly enough, occurred on an entirely different continent. The foundation of this whole project was laid between the years 1969 and 1970.
Yeah, that precise origin point is absolutely crucial to understanding the motivations behind everything that followed. So, in 1969, Noel Marshall, who was highly successful working as a talent agent in Hollywood at the time, he traveled to Mozambique with his wife, the professional actress Tippi Hedren.
She was actually over there for work, right?
Exactly. Hedren was on location in Africa to film an entirely separate movie titled Satan's Harvest. And during their downtime on this trip, the couple decided to take a tour of Gorongosa National Park. It's a massive protected area known for its diverse wildlife. During this tour, their local guides brought them to an abandoned Portuguese plantation house located right within the boundaries of the park.
And what they witnessed at this specific abandoned house, it served as the visual catalyst for the entire 11-year saga. Tippi Hedren later described finding this domestic human structure completely overrun and occupied by a massive pride of wild lions.
It's a haunting image.
It really is. She specifically noted the striking visual contrast of the scene. She saw lions sitting inside the window frames, casually moving in and out of the front doors, and just lounging on the verandas.
Right.
It was this extraordinary, almost surreal image of wild, untamed nature physically reclaiming a constructed human domestic space.
And it wasn't just a visually fascinating moment for them. It carried a very serious underlying environmental context. While they were observing these lions occupying the house, their tour guides and the local residents explained to Marshall and Hedren that the regional animal populations were becoming severely endangered.
Due to human activity, right?
Yes. Specifically, it was due to a massive, unregulated increase in commercial poaching in that area. The lions had actually moved into this vacated plantation house as a direct behavioral result of these environmental pressures. They were actively seeking shelter and territory away from the threat of human hunters.
Wow.
And learning about this severe threat of poaching deeply affected the couple. It actively inspired them to conceive a film project that would utilize big cats as the primary stars, basically, to promote a global message of wildlife conservation and preservation.
See, this is exactly where I have to question the immense psychological leap the creators took. Because going from simply observing wild lions in a natural sanctuary and, recognizing the very real threat of poaching, which is a noble realization, to making the active decision to write, personally finance, and physically star in a movie alongside them.
Yeah.
That is a staggering escalation in logic.
It really is.
You're taking a profound realization of the vulnerability of nature and deciding that the most logical response is to insert yourself directly into the center of a pride of apex predators as an actor.
It is a remarkable leap, yes. And it was driven by a very earnest desire to make a tangible difference, but it was executed through a lens of extreme, perhaps naive, ambition. They genuinely decided that to truly convey their conservation message to a mainstream audience, they needed to visually demonstrate humans and big cats actively coexisting in harmony. They believed that seeing this literal physical interaction on screen would evoke empathy and drive conservation efforts globally. So they took this theoretical concept back to the United States with them, and this direct decision led to an entirely unforeseen, highly dangerous domestic situation spanning from 1970 and 1972.
Right, which brings us to what we can accurately call the suburban jungle phase, marking the official pre-production of the film. Upon returning to California, Noel Marshall began drafting the very first script in the spring of 1970. Initially, the project was simply titled Lions, before being expanded to the working title Lions, Lions, and More Lions.
Right.
And Marshall actually co-wrote this initial draft in collaboration with the actor and voice artist Ted Cassidy.
And at this early stage, they also firmly integrated their immediate family into the core of the project. The family collectively agreed to act in the film. This included Melanie Griffith, who is Tippi Hedren's daughter from a previous marriage, as well as Noel's sons, John and Jerry Marshall.
And there's another son involved too, right?
Yes, another of Noel's sons, Joel Marshall, ultimately opted out of acting in front of the camera, but he still agreed to participate heavily in the production by taking on the highly demanding roles of art director and set decorator.
Well, here is where the logistics of their plan really confront the reality of animal behavior. They knew they needed wild animals for the film, obviously. So they actively consulted with professional animal trainers to figure out how to safely film with these massive creatures. They spoke extensively with a recognized trainer named Ron Oxley.
Right.
And to demonstrate the reality of interacting with these animals, Oxley actually brought a fully grown lion named Neil directly to their home in Sherman Oaks, California.
Just right into the house.
Right into the house. The purpose was to introduce the family to the sheer physical presence of a big cat. And after this consultation, Oxley and other professional trainers informed them of a very harsh truth. You cannot simply rent a prize of lions, place them on a film set, and expect them to cooperate or tolerate each other, let alone humans.
It just doesn't work that way biologically.
Exactly. The trainers suggested that the only practical way to achieve their specific cinematic vision of harmonious coexistence was to acquire their own animals, raise them from a very young age, give them basic training, and very gradually introduce them to each other and the family over an extended period of time.
And astonishingly, the family followed this advice to the letter. They began actively acquiring and rescuing lion cubs from various sources. This included local zoos and circuses that could no longer care for them. And they physically brought these growing predators into their standard Sherman Oaks suburban home to live directly alongside them.
Wow.
This was their chosen method of familiarization. They were attempting to build a social bond and establish a physical comfort level with the animals before any cameras were ever scheduled to roll.
To put the sheer magnitude of this decision into perspective for you, think about the common act of adopting a stray domestic dog. When you bring a stray dog into your home, you're naturally dealing with unpredictable behavioral quirks. You might experience some property damage, perhaps they chew the furniture, and there's a necessary period of behavioral adjustment.
Right, standard pet issues.
Right. Now, take that concept and scale the physical danger up exponentially. Bringing rescued lion cubs into a suburban living room magnifies that everyday situation into something almost incomprehensible. You are dealing with animals that possess raw, lethal biological instincts and immense physical power, all contained within the confined architecture of a standard residential property. A behavioral quirk from a domestic dog is an inconvenience. A behavioral quirk from a growing lion is a lethal threat.
And that physical reality directly intersected with the legal landscape of the era. It is really important to contextualize that this situation was occurring just before the enactment of the highly stringent 1973 Endangered Species Act in the United States.
Okay, so a slightly different legal era.
Exactly, but keeping these types of exotic apex predators in a standard suburban home was still entirely illegal because the family had not secured any of the necessary zoning permissions or exotic animal permits from local authorities.
Of course not.
And their neighbors inevitably noticed the presence of growing lions in a residential neighborhood. Consequently, in 1972, the local authorities formally discovered the animals and officially ordered the family to remove them from the property immediately, which of course resulted in their eviction from the Sherman Oaks home.
But this eviction, which, it would have ended almost any other project, it did not stop the production. Instead of shutting down their operation, the eviction forced the production to physically expand into a massive, structurally engineered compound. And this escalation leads us directly into the period between 1972 and 1976, which involved engineering the massive Soledad Canyon set.
Yes. Driven by the immediate need for vast acreage and a strict eviction from their suburban neighborhood, Marshall and Hedren purchased a large tract of land in Soledad Canyon, which is located in the Sierra Pelona Mountains of California. And here they commenced the construction of what was designed to be an African-style two-story house.
But it couldn't just be a normal house.
No, absolutely not. The underlying engineering required for this specific structure was absolutely astonishing. The house could not be built on a standard residential foundation. Instead, it had to be constructed upon 14 massive wooden telephone poles that were driven deep into the earth.
14 telephone poles?
Yes. And the reason for this extreme architectural reinforcement was straightforward physics. The structure needed to be sturdy enough to constantly support the combined moving dynamic weight of 50 fully grown big cats. They calculated that this moving mass would be approximately 20,000 pounds.
That is just incredible.
A standard floor simply would not survive the vibrational stress of that many heavy predators pacing simultaneously.
And the level of physical transformation they enacted on the arid California desert landscape is equally incredible. They didn't just build a house. They actively terraformed the surrounding geography to closely mimic the lush environment of the African plains of Tanzania.
Right, they had to make it look authentic.
Exactly. This involved the manual planting of thousands of specific trees, primarily cottonwoods, alongside imported Mozambique bushes to create an authentic visual canopy. They even went to the extreme length of physically damming a local creek that ran through the canyon to create a fully functioning permanent artificial lake directly on the property.
And the hidden infrastructure required to maintain this simulated environment and to sustain the animals was equally massive. Because they were housing a growing population of obligate carnivores, they had to construct a specialized 10,000-pound commercial meat freezer on the property.
10,000 pounds?
Yes. This was an absolute necessity given the staggering daily dietary requirements of feeding dozens of lions and tigers. They also built a dedicated, reinforced elephant barn. And to secure the perimeter, they enclosed massive living areas of up to 2,000 square feet with formidable, heavy-gauge, 14-foot-high steel fences.
To keep the public safe.
Exactly. These were specifically designed to prevent the animals from escaping the compound and entering the surrounding public areas. Additionally, they constructed a miniature operational studio, fully equipped editing rooms, a kitchen commissary to feed the crew, and, crucially, an on-site animal hospital to manage veterinary care.
And all of this complex, heavy infrastructure was being constructed under severe, constantly tightening budget constraints. They utilized entirely non-union labor for all of this construction. They simply could not afford the high rates of union workers, and they were also highly wary of violating strict union safety rules regarding working conditions in close proximity to dangerous untethered animals.
Right.
So the family was literally doing the heavy lifting themselves. Tippi Hedren, a famous Hollywood actress, was physically operating a heavy mechanical backhoe on the set to aid in the earth moving in construction. She was also solely managing the film's wardrobe department, which she described as adopting a very simple, pragmatic wash-and-wear look for the cast.
It creates a striking, almost absurd juxtaposition when you analyze the production logs. On one hand, you have immense fortress-level structural engineering required for the physical set. You know, the deep-driven 14 telephone poles, the fortified 14-foot steel fences, the industrial 10,000-pound freezer. And then on the other hand, you have a completely casual, almost home movie approach to the cast's daily wardrobe and the standard operational labor of making a feature film. Furthermore, the biological scope of the film continued to expand significantly during this construction phase. Noel Marshall decided to take in a fully grown African bull elephant named Timbo, as well as 2 infant Siberian tigers.
Wow, so branching out from just lions.
Exactly. With the inclusion of these entirely different species, the initial Leo-centric working titles were officially abandoned, and the film was definitively renamed Roar.
When you connect this massive, expanding scale of physical construction to the raw economics of the 1970s, it leads directly to the devastating financial toll it began to take on the family between 1973 and 1979. The financial hemorrhaging during this extended period was absolute and catastrophic.
Yes. The initial budget projections were completely shattered. The overall cost for this production eventually ballooned to an astronomical $17 million.
In the 1970s.
In the 1970s. To put that into perspective, by the year 1973, the baseline weekly operating costs had hit a staggering $4,000. That money was required just to cover the meager wages of the non-union crew and to purchase the massive quantities of specialized meat and feed required to keep the animals alive and, crucially, sedated through satiety. To sustain this relentless cash burn, the family was forced to engage in extreme, rapid liquidations of their personal accumulated assets. Over the years, they systematically sold off 4 separate residential properties they owned.
4 houses.
4 houses. They liquidated 600 acres of prime real estate they held near the Magic Mountain theme park. Eventually, the financial strain became so severe that Noel Marshall's previously successful commercial production company was forced to formally declare bankruptcy.
The financial sacrifices reached incredibly personal levels. Tippi Hedren was actually forced to sell a highly valuable fur coat that had been personally gifted to her by the legendary director Alfred Hitchcock. It was given to her as a token for her starring role in his classic film The Bergs.
Wow.
And to further cut costs, the family members had to completely absorb multiple highly technical crew roles themselves. John Marshall, for instance, was acting simultaneously as a primary animal wrangler, a mechanical set builder, an audio boom operator, and a camera operator.
Wearing every hat.
Yeah. And because they could not afford a full-time veterinary staff for minor procedures, John also had to act as a veterinary assistant. He was performing highly dangerous tasks, like physically drawing blood from the big cats and directly administering necessary vaccines.
And the entire production, it really would have collapsed completely if not for one crucial external financial lifeline. Prior to moving to Soledad Canyon, Noel Marshall had successfully secured an executive producer credit on the 1973 horror film The Exorcist.
Oh.
Yes. When The Exorcist became an unprecedented global box office phenomenon, Marshall began receiving substantial royalty checks. The proceeds from that immensely successful film were funneled directly and immediately into funding the endless gaping maw of the production of Roar.
I really want you to consider the underlying psychology here. What does this level of voluntary financial ruin reveal about the human capacity for the sunk cost fallacy? When a single creative project consumes your multiple homes, your massive land holdings, your established businesses, and your deeply personal heirlooms, the psychological barrier to simply walking away and cutting your losses becomes almost insurmountable.
That specific psychological barrier is perfectly and transparently articulated by Noel Marshall himself. In a revealing 1977 interview with the Montreal Gazette, a reporter specifically asked him why he continued to take such immense personal and financial risks when the project seemed entirely out of control.
And what did he say?
Marshall explained that after 5 continuous years of grueling production, absolutely everything they owned and everything they had achieved in their professional lives up to that point was entirely tied up in the physical assets of the project. He stated plainly that they estimated they were 55% complete with the filming and that they had crossed a definitive point of no return. In his mind, they simply had no alternative but to finish it, regardless of the ongoing cost.
We have established the staggering financial and logistical reality, but we need to shift our focus to the actual fictional narrative they were desperately trying to capture on film amidst all of this mounting pressure. Let's walk extensively through the scripted plot of Roar to understand what they were attempting to achieve narratively.
Right. So the scripted narrative is relatively straightforward, designed as an adventure comedy. It follows an eccentric American naturalist named Hank, played by Noel Marshall. Hank lives in isolation on a sprawling nature preserve in Tanzania. He lives directly alongside a massive collection of big cats, dedicating his life to studying their social behavior. The primary inciting incident of the plot is that his estranged wife, Madeline, played by Tippi Hedren, and their 3 children, John, Jerry, and Melanie, are flying all the way from Chicago to visit him at this remote preserve.
And Hank is originally supposed to pick his family up from the local airport, but he is significantly delayed by the arrival of his friend and assistant zoologist, a character named Motivo, played by actor Chielo Motivo. Motivo arrives with urgent news, warning Hank that an official government committee is arriving that very day to review Hank's grant funding, which sustains the preserve.
Right.
So while they wait for this committee to arrive, Hank gives Motivo a walking tour of the ranch. He explains the complex social dynamics of the lion pride that lives in and around his house. He specifically details the pride's collective fear of a highly aggressive rogue lion named Togar.
Setting up the antagonist.
Exactly. Hank explains that Togar constantly and violently quarrels with the pride's established peaceful leader, a lion named Robbie.
And then the narrative tension escalates with the arrival of the grant committee. One specific member of the committee, a man named Prentice, heavily disapproves of Hank's unorthodox method of living among the big cats. Prentice explicitly threatens to shoot the animals to eliminate the danger. During this tense visit, a violent, unscripted fight breaks out between 2 of the lions, which distracts Hank. The tigers on the preserve then suddenly attack members of the committee, physically injuring some of them. This prompts the terrified committee to flee the preserve in absolute panic.
Total chaos.
Meanwhile, realizing he is late, Hank and Motivo attempt to leave for the airport on Motivo's motorized boat. However, 2 tigers physically jump aboard the small vessel. The sudden added weight and panic cause Motivo to steer directly into a submerged log, sinking the craft and forcing both men to swim through the crocodile-infested waters to safety.
And while Hank is dealing with the sinking boat, the family, Madeline, John, Jerry, and Melanie, arrives at the local airport. Finding no one to pick them up, they are advised by locals to take a bus, and they finally arrive at the seemingly abandoned ranch. They open the doors and windows to let in the breeze, only to be immediately confronted by the horrifying sight of multiple fully grown lions actively tearing apart and eating a bloody zebra carcass right in the front yard.
Just a horrific welcoming.
Yeah. And because the doors are open, animals begin freely entering the house. The family is then actively stalked and pursued through the rooms by the aggressive rogue lion, Togar. The family attempts to hide in various cabinets and rooms, with Jerry eventually finding a rifle and attempting to shoot Togar as the rogue lion engages in a massive fight with the pride leader, Robbie.
The narrative then cuts back and forth. It follows Hank and Motivo as they steal bicycles to get back to the ranch, with Motivo at one point hiding high in a tree to distract the pursuing tigers using a physical umbrella. Hank finally manages to secure a car to return to the ranch. The next morning, the terrified family attempts to escape the property on Hank's larger boat, but the African elephant, Timbo, actively grabs the boat with his trunk, pulls the craft back to the shore, and physically destroys it. The family is then forced to swim across the lake, where they find another house. Through a series of interactions, they eventually realize the lions do not actually intend to kill them, and they begin to relax.
And then the climax of the film involves the antagonistic committee member, Prentice, and another armed man returning to the preserve with the explicit intent to shoot the big cats. Togar, the rogue lion, attacks and successfully kills both men. Togar then battles Robbie, the pride leader, one last time in a massive brawl.
Right.
Robbie stands his ground and defends his territory. The fight eventually ends. Hank finally reunites with his exhausted family, and in a bizarre comedic turn, they all simply agree to stay at the preserve for the remainder of the week.
What makes this narrative structure completely unique in the history of cinema is how the script was constantly fundamentally rewritten on a daily basis to accommodate the spontaneous, unprompted actions of the animals.
Because you can't control them.
Exactly. The plot point I just mentioned, where the elephant destroys the rowboat, was not in the original script. It was written into the narrative only after the crew witnessed their elephant, Timbo, spontaneously and effortlessly crush a metal camper shell that was sitting on the property.
Wow.
They realized they could capture that destructive power on film. Similarly, a scene involving tigers peacefully riding in the back of a car with Hank and Motivo took 7 full weeks to successfully film. This was simply because the animal trainers had to painstakingly teach the tigers how to safely ride in the moving vehicle without attacking the human passengers.
And the entire cinematographic approach had to adapt to the unpredictable behavior of the animals. The cinematographer, Jan de Bont, utilized a highly complex setup involving up to 8 Panavision 35mm cameras operating simultaneously. He treated the production more like a documentary wildlife shoot than a scripted feature.
He had to.
Yeah, he would strategically set up the cameras behind protective barriers and literally wait for hours, sometimes days, for the big cats to do something that could be woven into the film's narrative. Because the animals entirely dictated the action and pacing of the scenes, several of the prominent lions, specifically Robbie, Gary, and Togar, were actually given official writing and acting credits in the film's final crawl.
We should also carefully note how the film establishes its setting. The movie actually opens with a highly dynamic sequence of Noel Marshall racing a wild bull giraffe across the plains on a motorcycle. This specific footage was filmed on location in Kenya.
Right, establishing shots.
Yes. By splicing this authentic African footage into the beginning of the film, they further blurred the visual lines between the primary constructed set in California and the authentic African wilderness, attempting to sell the illusion of the Tanzanian preserve.
There is a massive operational paradox here.
Yeah.
You have a film production attempting to direct a traditional, structured comedic thriller, complete with distinct character arcs, rising action, and a scripted climax. But simultaneously, they are yielding complete narrative and physical control to wild animals. You simply cannot direct an apex predator to hit a specific tape mark on the floor, or to deliver a specific emotional beat, or to stop biting when a scene ends.
And yielding that level of control did not just alter the written script. It led directly and inevitably to unprecedented physical danger for absolutely everyone involved. The working environment was completely unpredictable, volatile, and deeply unsafe.
This requires us to look closely at the unprecedented human toll of this production, specifically the staggering number of injuries sustained. We must detail this strictly, objectively, and factually to understand the reality of the set. Historical records and participant accounts document between 70 and over 100 severe injuries among the roughly 140-person crew over the course of the 11 years. The severity and life-threatening nature of these injuries is difficult to overstate.
Yes, let us examine the specific, documented injuries sustained by the principal cast and crew members. Noel Marshall, the director and lead actor, was subjected to numerous attacks. During one instance, while interacting with male lions during a simulated fight scene, he was bitten completely through his hand. In another incident, he suffered 8 separate, deep puncture wounds on his leg from a lion that was reportedly curious about the anti-reflection makeup applied to Marshall's skin. He sustained severe, tearing injuries to his face and his chest. Consequently, he was hospitalized multiple times and was officially diagnosed with both systemic blood poisoning and localized gangrene resulting from the infected animal bites. It took him several years to fully recover from the compounding physical trauma.
And Tippi Hedren faced equally severe and terrifying physical trauma. During a promotional photo shoot for the film, she was bitten directly on the head by a lion named Cherries. The animal's jaw clamped down and its teeth actively scraped against her skull. The injury required immediate treatment and a tetanus shot at Sherman Oaks Hospital.
It is terrifying.
In a completely separate and horrifying incident, Timbo, the 5-ton elephant, became agitated, used his trunk to pick Hedren up by her ankle, lifted her into the air, and fractured her ankle before bucking her off his back onto the ground. This specific incident left her with severe abrasions, phlebitis, and gangrene. Additionally, over the course of the production, she was scratched deeply on the arm by a leopard and bitten on the chest by a cougar.
Melanie Griffith, who was just a teenager during much of the active production, suffered a catastrophic attack. She was actively attacked by a female lion, which mauled her face. The injury was immensely severe, requiring 50 sutures and highly complex facial reconstruction surgery to repair the damage to her features.
That is just heartbreaking.
The psychological trauma was immense. Following this attack, she formally quit the production, stating she did not want to lose half her face. She was briefly replaced by a stand-in actress named Patsy Ned, before Griffith ultimately, and surprisingly, decided to return to the set to reshoot her remaining scenes.
The cinematographer, Jan de Bont, suffered one of the most infamously severe injuries on the entire set. While attempting to capture a specific angle by filming under a heavy tarpaulin, he was suddenly attacked and completely scalped by the lion Cherries. The massive flesh wound required 220 sutures to surgically close his scalp.
220 sutures?
Yes, and astonishingly, after recovering from this massive trauma in the hospital, he voluntarily returned to the chaotic set to complete his duties as cinematographer.
Noel's son, John Marshall, was also violently attacked. During a scene, a lion suddenly jumped on him, pinned him, and began repeatedly biting the back of his head. The animal's grip was so powerful that it required the direct physical intervention of 6 grown men pulling simultaneously to separate the animal from him. His resulting wound required 56 sutures to close.
It's a miracle they survived.
Furthermore, assistant director Doran Cowper suffered a truly horrific encounter. He was suddenly attacked and bitten directly in the throat and jaw by the rogue lion Togar. During the mauling, the lion also attempted to physically pull off one of his ears. Copper sustained massive, tearing injuries to his scalp, his chest, and his thigh in what was clinically described as a nearly fatal attack. He required 4.5 hours of complex emergency surgery at Palmdale General Hospital just to survive.
The psychological environment on this set was, understandably, incredibly tense and fearful. Witnessing these repeated bloody attacks took a severe psychological toll on the crew members who were forced to work around the animals daily. At one specific point following a severe injury, 20 crew members left the production entirely en masse, refusing to return.
You can hardly blame them.
Not at all. The overall turnover rate for the crew was incredibly high, as many professional individuals simply refused to expose themselves to such a hazardous, unregulated workplace. Because of Noel Marshall's known financial connection to his previous famous horror film, persistent rumors even began to spread among the fearful crew regarding the curse of the exorcist, actively plaguing their production set. Tragically, the human toll was heavily accompanied by animal casualties. The production lost 14 lions and tigers, which died from various airborne illnesses that swept through the compound during the extended production timeframe.
Analyzing these facts raises an essential point regarding the sheer, irrational will required to persist. It really makes you wonder how anyone could keep going. If your director, your lead actress, and your primary cinematographer are all hospitalized with life-threatening injuries, conventional logic and basic human preservation dictate that you shut down the set permanently.
Absolutely.
The determination to continuously cross the finish line defied all established logic regarding workplace safety, liability, and sanity. And just as the compounding physical toll on the human crew seemed entirely insurmountable, the local geography itself turned against the production, providing an even larger physical obstacle. Just when they thought it could not get worse, we have to detail the massive environmental disasters, specifically the catastrophic floods and subsequent fires that entirely devastated the Soledad Canyon compound.
Yes, the most catastrophic environmental event occurred on the night of February 9th, 1978. The region experienced incredibly heavy, sustained rains. Because of the deluge, structural pipes and earthen berms located up in the nearby Aliso Canyon completely burst.
Oh, wow.
These engineering structures had originally been positioned to safely redirect rushing water away from the local Southern Pacific Railroad tracks, but the sheer volume of the stormwater entirely overwhelmed them. This failure redirected an immense, violent torrent of water directly down the canyon and onto the Marshall property. The result was a devastating 10-foot-high wall of floodwater rapidly sweeping through the carefully engineered, low-lying set. The immediate danger to human and animal life was profound. 4 members of the film's sound crew became suddenly trapped in a building by the rapidly rising waters and required emergency physical rescue to avoid drowning. Noel Marshall, who had just recently left the hospital recovering from injuries and was actually pending scheduled surgery on his knee, ignored his condition and actively waded into the freezing floodwaters to manually rescue the panicked animals from their submerged enclosures.
Right into the floodwater.
Yes. During the absolute chaos of the flood, as the massive 14-foot steel fences and wooden cages structurally collapsed under the pressure of the water, 15 big cats completely escaped the confines of the compound into the surrounding canyon.
And this mass escape led to a tragic, unavoidable intervention by local law enforcement. Realizing the extreme danger of 15 panicked apex predators roaming near populated areas, the local sheriff and armed officers were deployed. They were tragically forced to shoot and kill 3 of the escaped lions to protect the surrounding public.
That is awful.
It was. One of the lions killed by law enforcement was Robbie, who was not only the lead lion of the film's narrative, but a beloved animal the family had raised. The physical and financial ruin caused by the flood was catastrophic. It completely destroyed the majority of the physical sets, the ranch housing structures, the highly expensive editing equipment, and vast amounts of unedited film stock that was stored on site. They estimated the sudden loss at over $3 million in damages. Fortunately, they discovered that the primary master film negative had already been securely transported to a studio vault in Hollywood for editing, saving the core of the film.
The stubborn resilience demonstrated by the family in the aftermath of this destruction is remarkable. Friends, completely strangers, and even massive corporate entities offered vital assistance. The Southern Pacific Railroad office, realizing the emergency involving the displaced animals, actually offered to send massive, secure railway cars to the property to serve as temporary, reinforced housing for the surviving predators.
That was incredibly helpful.
It was. The production, however, was forced into a complete grinding halt that lasted for a full year. They had to wait just to allow the saturated ground to physically recover and dry out enough to support heavy machinery. It then took 8 relentless months of manual labor to rebuild the destroyed sets, reconstruct the cages, and they had to purchase and replant 700 replacement trees just to restore the simulated African landscape.
And as if a massive flood was not enough of a biblical plague, immediately following the resolution of the water damage, the environment struck again. 12 entirely separate, massive wildfires broke out in the Acton, California area that September.
You cannot make this up.
The intense heat and smoke of the fires actively threatened the rebuilt compound. Although they had to prepare for emergency evacuation, miraculously, the shifting winds spared the property, and the animals remained unharmed during this terrifying subsequent crisis.
Think about the compounding nature of these disasters. It is like trying to build a delicate house of cards while standing in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. The foundational, everyday instability of working with 150 unpredictable apex predators was constantly being battered by extreme external forces. Massive financial ruin, horrific physical injuries, and literal acts of God in the form of floods and fires.
This sheer accumulation of disaster brings us from the eventual exhausted end of this grueling 11-year production phase to the ultimate release of the film and the stark, uncompromising financial reality that was waiting for the family at the box office. We are now looking at the release window of 1981.
The release strategy immediately encountered massive systemic hurdles. After all the sacrifice, Roar completely lacked a North American theatrical release upon its completion. There were 2 primary, insurmountable reasons for this failure. First, the standard film distributors in the United States demanded the lion's share of the film's projected profits.
Which was unacceptable to them.
Exactly, because this financial demand directly conflicted with Marshall and Hedren's core, founding intention, which was to allocate those specific funds directly to the ongoing, expensive care and preservation of the massive collection of animals they now permanently owned. Second, the production faced intense, organized scrutiny and pushback from Hollywood unions because it had stubbornly utilized a non-union crew for almost the entirety of its highly dangerous 11-year run. Distributors simply did not want the liability or the union backlash.
Consequently, entirely shut out of their home market, the film was forced to have its world premiere internationally. It officially debuted in Sydney, Australia on October 30, 1981. It was eventually picked up for limited international distribution by Filmways Pictures and Alpha Films, with the latter company choosing to release it under the highly expanded, somewhat dramatic title Roar: Spirit of the Jungle.
The ultimate financial fallout was devastating. Despite performing relatively well in a few specific international markets, notably West Germany and Japan, the film was an unmitigated, massive box office failure on a global scale. It grossed a mere $2 million worldwide.
Compared to $17 million.
Right. When you weigh that against its staggering balloon $17 million production budget, not even factoring in marketing costs, it was a catastrophic loss. This grim reality stands in sharp, tragic contrast to Tippi Hedren's highly optimistic, drastically incorrect initial predictions. She had previously stated publicly that she believed the film would be a massive global hit, confidently estimating it would gross somewhere between $125 million and $150 million.
If we impartially review the contemporary critical reception upon its 1981 release, the reviews were highly mixed and frequently bewildered. Variety magazine, a major industry trade, acknowledged the film's deeply intended message, calling it a passionate plea for wildlife preservation. However, they described the actual on-screen execution as a Jaws of the jungle and succinctly summarized the chaotic experience as born free, gone berserk.
That is quite the description.
The publication specifically and repeatedly noted the extreme thinness and absurdity of the scripted plot. Conversely, a prominent critic named David Robinson, writing for The Times, offered genuine praise. He stated that the raw, unsimulated depiction of interactions between humans and wild animals actively overturned centuries of established preconceptions about relationships in nature. However, The universal underlying criticism from almost all outlets consistently circled back to the glaring structural weakness of the narrative itself and the obvious visible terror of the human actors.
There is a massive fundamental disconnect here that we must analyze. You have the creator's deeply noble, entirely earnest intentions for animal conservation directly colliding with the public's perception of the firm's chaotic, terrifying execution. The creators intended to show a beautiful harmony between man and beast. But the audience, watching the actors genuinely bleeding and fleeing in terror, saw only horror and uncontrolled danger.
Following this crushing financial failure and the highly mixed, confused critical reception, the film effectively disappeared from the mainstream cinematic consciousness. It faded into complete obscurity, becoming a rare, whispered-about artifact among film historians, only to be entirely resurrected and reevaluated decades later by a new generation.
That transition brings us to the year 2015, marking the film's highly publicized re-release and a massive, modern, critical reevaluation. Exactly 34 years after its initial, quiet international debut in Australia, an independent distribution company called Drafthouse Films, founded by Tim League, officially bought the rights to Roar for its very first official United States theatrical release.
The promotional campaign executed by Drafthouse Films was highly provocative, extremely aggressive, and leaned heavily into the documented danger of the production. Instead of promoting it as a family conservation film, their marketing materials explicitly referred to the movie as a snuff version of Swiss Family Robinson.
Very intense marketing.
Yes. They heavily highlighted the massive injury toll with a stark, unforgettable tagline. No animals were harmed during the making of this film. 70 members of the cast and crew were.
This sensational marketing approach caused immediate severe friction with the original creators. Tippi Hedren, still fiercely protective of the original vision, actively pushed back against these provocative promotional materials via a designated spokesman. The spokesman stated publicly that the Drafthouse promotion was filled with inaccuracies regarding the nature of the injuries and the tone of the set, and Hedren subsequently canceled several highly anticipated scheduled interviews regarding the re-release. Furthermore, the Animal Foundation she had established officially requested she not speak publicly about the film during this specific re-release window to avoid endorsing the sensationalized marketing angle.
Despite the intense controversy over how it was being marketed, the modern critical consensus shifted significantly compared to 1981. On the prominent review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, the film currently holds a generally positive approval rating of 72%. If we impartially report on the modern critical reviews from 2015, we see a deep fascination with the sheer, undeniable reality of the unsimulated footage. Esquire magazine highly praised it, declaring it shock cinema worth preserving, focusing on the absolute uniqueness of the visual record. RogerEbert.com offered a more mixed analytical assessment, calling it a slack thriller, featuring Scooby-Doo-like chase scenes that ultimately focus much more on the unpredictable actions of the animals than the intended plot. Other cultural outlets, such as Flavor Wire, heavily panned the film's threadbare, chaotic editing and the bizarre, dubbed dialogue, accurately describing the final product as a strange, jarring cross between an authentic nature special and a terrifying home movie.
You really have to observe how the sheer passage of time fundamentally shifted the film's cultural identity. It completely transitioned from being viewed as a failed, poorly constructed, misguided blockbuster attempt in 1981 to being celebrated in 2015 as an unbelievable singular documentary artifact of reckless human ambition. Modern audiences are absolutely not watching it for the scripted emotional arc of Hank and Togar. They are watching it as an unvarnished historical record of real people miraculously surviving a self-imposed, highly dangerous crucible.
That lasting historical record leads us directly to the legacy and the present-day impact of this massive project, spanning from the fallout in the 1980s right up to today's context. We must carefully trace the ultimate personal aftermath for the core creators. The immense emotional distance created by the grueling 11-year production, the massive unrecoverable financial strain, and the severe physical trauma eventually fractured the family. It directly led to Noel Marshall and Tippi Hedren's permanent divorce in 1982, shortly after the film's failure.
The sheer scale of the failure deeply and permanently affected Noel Marshall. The global financial failure entirely hindered their intended optimistic plan to easily fund the animal's long-term retirement through box office receipts. According to later interviews with his son, John, Noel became profoundly, deeply disillusioned after pouring absolutely everything he owned and everything his acquaintances owned into a passion project that failed so spectacularly on a financial level.
It was a devastating blow.
It was. He was broken by the experience. Noel Marshall never directed another film for the rest of his life, and he passed away in the year 2010.
Tippi Hedren's trajectory, however, galvanized entirely around the responsibility to the animals. In 1983, recognizing the absolute immediate necessity of caring for the massive population of big cats they had acquired and bred animals that could never be released into the wild, she founded the nonprofit Roar Foundation.
Right.
Through this foundation, she officially established the Shambhala Preserve, a massive animal sanctuary located on the exact same Soledad Canyon property where the film was shot. She entirely transformed herself into a staunch, dedicated, and highly vocal advocate for animal rights, the rigorous preservation of natural habitats, and a fierce opponent of animal exploitation and entertainment. She meticulously documented the entire harrowing 11-year experience in her 1985 autobiography, appropriately titled The Cats of Shambhala.
The film itself endured through the decades via a highly dedicated underground cult legacy. Long before the polished 2015 re-release, it survived in the cultural memory via rare, highly priced out-of-print DVDs sold quietly on secondary collector markets. Modern physical media eventually caught up to the legend, with all the films eventually releasing a high-definition Blu-ray version.
That release was important.
It was. This release was notable because it featured an exclusive, feature-length audio commentary recorded by John Marshall and Tim League, providing first-hand, harrowing context to the on-screen chaos. Furthermore, during the recent global pandemic, Drafthouse authorized a special at-home VOD release of the film, where a significant percentage of the generated profits actively benefited struggling theater workers facing severe financial hardship.
The ultimate enduring paradox of this entire, sprawling biography is incredibly profound when you step back and look at the timeline. The physical film, Roar, entirely failed in its primary cinematic and financial goals. It thoroughly bankrupted its core creator, caused immense lasting physical harm to dozens of people, and failed to achieve the box office success needed to effortlessly fund global conservation. Yet the massive physical infrastructure and sanctuary that the runaway production forced into permanent existence, the Shambhala Preserve, successfully fulfilled the original core conservation mission. The sanctuary continues to rescue, house, and care for hundreds of mistreated big cats, operating successfully and safely right up to the present day. The massive cinematic failure directly birthed a tangible, lasting environmental success.
As we conclude, leave yourself to ponder the ethical evolution of wildlife media and cinematic production. Consider the immense strict regulations, the reliance on digital computer effects, and the rigorous union safety protocols that govern modern filmmaking today. Ask yourself whether a project that so thoroughly, recklessly blurs the line between a family home movie, a scripted thriller, and entirely unsimulated, highly dangerous animal contact could ever possibly exist again in the modern era, or if the production of Roar stands as a singular, entirely unrepeatable artifact in the entire history of human cinema.
Thanks for listening.